Hey guys, it's Amy here, and today I bring you my June wrap-up. As always, these are all non-spoiler reviews, so you don't need to worry about being spoiled if you haven't read the book yet. So let's get on. The first book I read in June was The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. If you haven't heard of Wind in the Willows, it basically follows a group of woodland creatures who can all kind of speak and move around like humans and kind of act and behave like humans as well, and their interactions with each other basically. As you can see on the front, the main characters are Badger, Ratty and Mole, and then they have their friend Toad, who's a bit of a rascal, and Toad always seems to be getting himself into trouble and they're having to help him out of that trouble. It's really rather funny, to be honest. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely suggest it to anyone who maybe has children that they'd like to read a slightly different story to. It's just a really lovely read. The next book I read was a graphic novel, and it is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, No Future for You. This is the second part of the 8th season comic books of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you saw last month's wrap up, you'll know that I read the first part of this series and I didn't really get into it very well, but after reading this I really enjoyed it. I won't say much about this one because obviously if you haven't read any of the comics it's not going to make much sense to you. This one basically just carries on where the other one left off. It did explain a lot more of the things that was confusing me in the first book, so I think as I carry on it's definitely going to be a lot more enjoyable. I just love getting back into the Buffy world. It makes me feel so nostalgic. I just love it. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I was sent by David Fickling Books for an honest review, and it was Running Girl by Simon Mason. I have really mixed views on this book. I can't work out if I really enjoyed it or if I just don't know if I really enjoyed it. The premise of the story is that there is a young girl who's been murdered and she's found in a pond, and the protagonist of the story, Garvey Smith, used to date her at one point, and he is somewhat of a genius. He's extremely clever, really high IQ, somewhat of a Sherlock Holmes. He likes to investigate things and find out those little details. So when her body is found, he decides to take it upon himself to discover who murdered her and why, what happened surrounding her death. The first half of the book I really enjoyed. It was really quick paced and lots of exciting things were happening. I felt like it was a puzzle to be solved and we were trying to work out who this murderer. It was all very exciting, and Garvey was just rather funny in that part. About halfway through, the book took this extremely dark turn, which took me totally by surprise. To give you a small inkling of what I'm talking about, and it won't spoil the story for you because it's quite prevalent throughout the story, there are themes of paedophilia, rape and stalkers and things like that. And I'm not saying those are bad things to include in a story. This is a YA story though, and I would say that this dark aspect of the story ruined it for me because it got to the point where there was just too much of it. I would also say that I left this book feeling quite miserable about the way that we do things in the world. As I said, for the first half of the book it was quite entertaining because Garvey was trying to figure it out and it was just really fun, and it was just, you know, a puzzle that he needed to solve. And then it was like Garvey kind of clicked and thought, actually no, someone's been murdered and it's a really awful situation, and this girl has been through an awful time of it and now she's dead. The really good thing that I took from this book because of those themes and that kind of occurring was the fact that actually in everyday life we watch things, CSI, Midsummer Murders, Silent Witness, all these kind of programs where people are being murdered and it's almost like a game. It's entertainment to find out who the murderer is, and we watch these programs because it's entertaining, because murder apparently is entertaining, and we watch these programs about serial killers and people who've done these horrific things, and it's a form of entertainment for us, and I just found that to be a really interesting thing, and this book really made me think about that and consider why we find things like that entertaining. On a side note, part of my degree, my dissertation, I actually wrote on morbid curiosity and why people almost seek out depressing and kind of things relating to death and stuff like that. And this book just, I don't know, this is why I'm really struggling to say whether I really enjoyed it or whether I really didn't like it. But aspects of it that were really fantastic and really good, and there were aspects of it that made me really consider stuff in life, and I think that's also a really good thing. So that was one crazy review, and I don't even know whether I'm going to be able to edit that to make it even make sense, so I hope you've taken somewhat of my ideas from this book and you'll know whether this is something that you would want to read. I would warn you, if you are younger and you don't enjoy things, rape, murder, that kind of stuff, I definitely wouldn't read this. It's quite a dark read come the end. All in all, I think I would give it between 3.5 and 4 stars. Fourth book I read was also a graphic novel, and it was The Wicked and the Divine, and this was really interesting. The idea in this book is that there are these gods, and every 90 years they come down to Earth, but they're only here for 2 years and then they die. Obviously some of the gods are highly regarded and they're like pop stars and things like that, and then some of them are slightly more evil and people don't really like them. One of the gods really reminded me of Rihanna. I think she really looks like Rihanna. I don't know if you can see that picture there, but throughout the book I was like, this girl really looks like Rihanna. So yes, I don't have much more to say on that one. 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely will be picking up the next one. Next book I read in June, it was the biggest book I've read so far this year, and it was A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. This is the second part of the Song of Ice and Fire series. I would say that my least favourite characters to follow at the moment are Bran and Rickon and Davos. I don't really find those stories very interesting. Weirdly, I don't particularly enjoy Arya's stories in the programme, but in the books I really enjoy Arya's character. I think possibly it's just because I imagine her slightly different in the book. My other favourite characters would have to be Tyrion and Jon Snow. I think they're brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in the next book. So again, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. There are only 3 more books to go. The next book I read was Attachments by Rainbow Rowell. You may have seen this one in my last month's book haul. I was really looking forward to reading this one, and I know that I made a good decision in buying it because I absolutely adored it. The basic premise of the story is that it is based in 1999, where the internet is a new kind of thing and it's being introduced into businesses. This story is set in a newspaper where they are obviously now using computers and they are allowed to send emails to each other. The protagonist of this story is a young man who works at night in this newspaper, and his job is to monitor the emails of everyone in the office to make sure they're not using their office time to send personal emails to each other. So the emails of 2 women in his office keep getting flagged up because obviously they're not talking about work and they're talking about their own personal things. Instead of sending them a warning, which is what this guy's meant to do when he sees emails like this, he kind of gets wrapped up in their story and starts reading all their emails and actually takes enjoyment from reading their emails and seeing their lives and everything that's going on with them. And he discovers that he's actually beginning to have feelings for one of the women, but he's never actually seen her. He doesn't know what she looks like. He knows where her desk is, but he doesn't know what she looks like. It's just such a wonderful, cutesy, good, happy feeling book, and it was just hilarious. Like, I haven't laughed out loud as much in a book as this one in a really, really long time. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, and I added it to my favourites on Goodreads. The final 2 books I read this month I read on my iPad, and I got them from my library's Overdrive system. I think it's fantastic. I've read so many good books on there for free and I just love it so much. So the first one of those books was The Crane Wife by Patrick Ness. It follows the story of a guy in his 40s who has been left by his wife. He's got an older daughter and they get along really well, but he just seems to get along with women, but they never seem to have that spark enough to stay together for a very long time. And then one night he is randomly woken up by this strange noise in his garden, and he goes outside and discovers this giant crane, which is a bird obviously, and it's been shot through the wing by an arrow, and he saves it and he helps it. And the next day when he's working in his shop, a very mysterious and alluring woman comes in and they quickly hit it off and he begins dating her and things like that. I don't want to say much more because it would be quite difficult to explain anyway, because the story's kind of split into these different ways of telling it, through his perspective, through his daughter's perspective, and then through the perspective of the crane, which I don't want to suggest too much, but that's a really interesting part of the story. Like I said, there's a lot of symbolism and kind of old folklore kind of stories weaved in with it. It's a really interesting read and not what I expected at all. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars in total, and I think I will definitely reread it again in the future just to see all the things that I possibly missed, because there was so much kind of woven in and there's so many things I reckon you could miss the first time reading. It was just really nice. So the final book I read this month was The Penelope Ad by Margaret Atwood. The idea of this book is taken from Homer's account in the Odyssey of Penelope and Odysseus and their story. Penelope and Odysseus were married to each other. Odysseus then left Penelope to go and fight a war, and he left for about 30 years I think it was before coming back and discovering that his wife, in the time that he had been gone, had to put up with all these suitors and things who were trying to basically take the kingdom from her. They wanted to marry her, they wanted to have all of her money and wealth, and she was trying to keep the kingdom alive and thriving for when Odysseus returned. This is a very modern take on the story, and it is told from the perspective of Penelope once she has died, and she's kind of looking back and telling you what's happened and what's happened since then, like all the kind of people in heaven or hell with her and what's going on. It's all quite entertaining. And this is another book which I just didn't know what to expect, and I really enjoyed it. It was so satirical and witty and just really on point with just how hilarious it was. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's also gone into my favourite. So those are all the books that I read in June. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, what your thoughts are on them. Let me know what you read in June. I'd love to speak to you about it. As always, I will leave links to Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, everything down below. So I think that's everything for today, guys. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I will see you soon. Bye! Next question is, if you could hook up with anyone from Harry Potter, who would it be?